Welcome to this special edition of Soul to Soul with Pure Radio host Mike Becht. For over 25 years, Soul to Soul has shared intimate conversations with Christian musicians, authors, and ministries, people making an impact for the gospel. With this special edition of Soul to Soul, here is Mike Becht.
Gentlemen, it's great to sit down with you and to have this conversation for Pure Radio and to talk about this book. And a lot of times conversations begin at a starting point. Usually there's an event and sometimes with a music artist, it's a new album release, or with an author, it's a book that is published and made available. And that's the case today. There's a book called Let's Break the Rules that both of you, Dan Woodard and Dr. Dan Reinhardt, I'm speaking with today. And you've both co-authored this book. It's a bit of a provocative title, Let's Break the Rules. But before we dig into the subject material and the matter and the things that are expounded upon in the book, let's talk about you guys for just a moment. And I'd like to start with Dan Woodard. You're kind of the focus of the book for the most part. Would you tell us a little bit about your background, Dan, where you grew up, what your family was like, how you came to know about the Lord and begin this walk?
Sure. I was born and raised in Western New York, raised in a Christian home, went to church all the time. I knew at age 8 that I was going to be going to Bible college. I knew where that was going to be happening. And so I did. After high school, went to Tennessee Temple University and stayed there till I graduated, and then came to Canada as a missionary, serving among First Nations peoples, and I've been doing this for 41 years. I'm blessed with a wife of almost 37 years, Deanna, and 3 sons, and they're all married, and we have 5 grandchildren, and we are very blessed. God has been very good to us.
That's one of those stories that I wish everybody could write, where you start out at a young age and you know the Lord from your earliest memories. I'm similar in that respect. I don't think there was ever a time I didn't know of God and desire to know Him better. Dr. Dan Reinhardt, you have a background that maybe is similar. Where did you come from, and how did you find your footing in the world of faith?
Well, everybody has their own unique story, and mine is quite different from Dan's. I grew up as a missionary's kid. My father and mother were missionaries in India. So my earliest memories are India. And along with that were boarding school. And so boarding school back in those years was not actually a good experience. So I had a very convoluted experience with boarding school. And that was a part of my shaping. But the Lord brought me through that, and that's now become actually part of the fabric of what has made me who I am today. And what boarding school did for me, being separated from my parents, was I decided then if I can't have my earthly father present, then I'm going to really lean on my heavenly Father. And so from an early age on, God as my heavenly Father has been the predominant way that I understand and experience Him. Then I came back to North America, went to Bible school, met my dear wife there. Then we went to Israel, and I did a master's degree in Jerusalem in the backgrounds of the Bible, became a pastor for 22 years, pursued a doctorate in leadership development, which then resulted in me creating a course called the CREST Leadership Program, which helps people at midlife and second half to get clarity so they can flourish in their second half. I've been doing that for almost 20 years now.
That's a fascinating story, and again, I love just hearing people's background, because I think that in some point, somewhere, we can always find a way to connect with a part of your story, even if your story is boarding school in India, which is completely alien to my experience. Yeah. And yet, there are some common threads that we can all latch onto, and that's encouraging.
That's right. And I do have 4 grown children with 12 grandchildren, so we are very fulfilled as grandparents.
Well, that's probably the best part right there. 12 grandchildren.
Yes. Yep.
Your quiver is full with grandkids. Yep. Let me go back to Dan Woodard for a moment and start kind of picking apart a little bit of the past, because it was the events of your childhood and the formative years, the developmental years, that kind of created a worldview that was not as freeing, perhaps, as it could be. I'm trying to choose the words carefully so as to let you tell your story and not let me give it away. But you grew up in a home that was dysfunctional. Is that fair to say?
It was, though when I was growing up, I never thought of my home as dysfunctional. I was raised with lots of rules, and my faith, I viewed my faith as if I just kept all the rules, I would be a good Christian. The destructive part about my growing up years was I was raised with 6 rules that were never mentioned outright, but they always hung in the air. And those rules happened to be the rules of most every ACOA, adult children of alcoholic. We did not have alcohol in our home, but we had the rules of alcoholic homes. And those rules were: don't talk, don't feel, don't trust, don't think, and don't choose, and don't change. And so those rules had a way of leaking out in pretty well every day. Children were to be seen and not heard. All of our meal times were eaten in silence. We never had discussions. We were not encouraged to feel. We were told to stop crying lots. Don't think, just do what you're told. Don't trust. You can't trust people outside the home, so just keep things to yourself. And don't choose. Just do what you're told. I'm in charge. Don't ask questions. And never change, because change and compromise are the same, and so just stay the same. So I didn't know those rules existed really the way that I've listed them until I was age 34. And so I lived those rules for the first 3.5 decades of my life without realizing that I was doing so.
But as it relates to your faith, because you mentioned that you knew at a very young age that you loved God, wanted to serve Him, and you had a path that you were going to follow, and you've followed that, which is admirable. But how did the rules of the house color your faith? How did they set the prism by which you saw God and His grace? How did that affect you in those early years?
Well, I thought that God was a lot like my dad. And so I needed to be quiet. I needed to follow God without question. I needed to live my life as faithfully to the rules of what was taught at church, in youth group. I needed to strive to be perfect. If I could be perfect, then God would really be happy with me. But going into Bible college, I went into college with a lot of confusion because I couldn't figure out why Dad would teach me certain things and not live what he taught me. And I really struggled in my faith trying to please God, because I wasn't able to please Dad. I did exactly what Dad wanted me to do. I practiced the piano. I went to the Bible college that he said he and Mom wanted me to go to when he told me that at age 8. I did everything that Dad wanted me to do, but clearly my dad and I were detached, and we didn't know how to talk. And so my faith was strong head, weak heart. I was out of touch with my emotions and out of touch with my heart. And therefore my relational style in college and in the first 5-10 years of ministry, I look back on those years and I was following God the best that I knew, but I was quite detached from who I was and who God was. And looking back on it, the Lord really used my wife, Deanna, to wake me up, to bring me to my senses that I needed to face my issues of pain. I needed to talk way more. I needed to deal with some stuff if our marriage was going to survive.
Before we explore that, because there's some great things to hear there, I want to back up one step, because in that window of time when you were still trying to do it the other way, trying to do it by the rules, as you say, inevitably you're going to encounter some Christians, some people that follow Jesus, whose freedom may have looked almost incongruous to your worldview of what God was. And what were those encounters like when you would find someone that seemed to have a joy and a freedom that you didn't possess, and yet still said they were serving the same God? How did you reconcile those disparate worldviews?
I think in some ways I was drawn to people like that. I dated girls like that. I really appreciated the opportunity to get to know people who had a joy about them and who had talking skills that I didn't have. I grew up very shy. I was raised to be nice, and I had the belief if I could just be nice to everybody, then everybody could be my friend, and we would all be happy. But some of my friends knew how to have intensive conversations, and that always amazed me, that they knew how to risk asking hard questions. And I was not raised that way and didn't have those skills. And so I had an intrigue about people who could manage their lives differently than me. But I could not do that myself. I was only committed to being Mr. Nice to everybody. And it intrigued me increasingly that as time went on into my 20s and into my 30s, there were some people that it wouldn't work. In spite of how nice I was, they didn't necessarily like me.
Isn't that so odd? Because you're such a likable gentleman. These conflicts, whether they're outward or inward, and in your case, I suspect there were more internal conflicts, they find a way of manifesting, and usually these moments require some correction. Something happens. There's a moment where the veneer breaks. There's a something, and everyone has a moment of breakdown, a moment of surrender, a moment of failure. We can call it different things, and people arrive at that place from different and in different ways. I remember one for me that's completely different, but it changed everything from that point on. Can you kind of set the scene of how you arrived at that moment and how that unfolding, rewriting, reimagining life, how did that begin for you? Where was that? What was that time like?
That happened in my 10th year of ministry. So the first 10 years in ministry, I was living at a camp. And I was just having fun. I was doing a number of things that I am gifted to do. I was teaching in a Native Bible school. I was directing an outreach program, visiting different communities. I was working in a team context. But in my 10th year of ministry, one certain day, it's like you turned a knob. And for the first time in 10 years, I could no longer please my mission director. And everything that I did for the next few months was the wrong thing. And I had never imagined such a scenario. So I hit a wall. I could not do anything right. And my wife and I just talked about it a lot. And there came a day when she said to me, "What are you going to do when certain people treat you like a doormat and they walk all over you? What are you going to do then?" And my thought was, oh, she's having a hard day. She doesn't understand missions, and she's just depressed. And we had an epiphany that day, and my dear wife formed two fists of her hands and hit the table to wake me up and said, "Honey, you can be here after the summer, but I will be gone." That was exactly what I needed to hear. And I'll never forget that day, because I did wake up. And within 2 weeks, I resigned, and it was a messy departure, but we moved to a different province after that. And my life took a turn for the better. And I started learning. My learning curve took a steep spike, and I began to be a serious lifelong learner. And I've been living that way for 31 years now, and I have never looked back. And I am so grateful for that period of time when God woke me up, and I am very blessed.
Before we get into a little bit farther down the journey, I think there are people that will hear this interview, and there are people from all walks of life at virtually every stage of your life. Someone is going to be able to relate. Some people are still trapped in that rules stage, and they'll identify with that. They'll hear what you're saying, and they'll find themselves in that story. Others will hear themselves later in your story in that new life and that new freedom. But usually when there's a dramatic change, there's a dip, right? There's a moment where things get worse before they get better, at least on the outside. There's a freedom and your eyes are open, but it's created complexities and uncomfortable conversations and situations. And I think there are some people that might be right in that spot. Can you offer some hope to some folks that have just had their breakthrough and are now feeling like they're treading water in an ocean that's a little bit turbulent and not sure which way to swim? What was that like in those first few weeks of that time?
Oh, it was, I would describe it as a pit. I had never seen such darkness in myself that I would feel so badly, so depressed, so emotionally in conflict. There was a civil war going in me. I was really confused. And one thing about being Mr. Nice, along with that comes the belief that you never have to have an ending. Like, if you just be nice, everything will be smooth and just sweeps up onto the carpet, and it's okay. And so looking back on it, I had no concept of endings, and now I do. And I look at that ending. I really should have moved on 2 years earlier, but I overstayed my time at that camp. And I have journaled the top dozen endings of my adulthood. And I have learned that the best endings come before the conflict happens, come early. And if you see things, you can make choices to leave and to explore what God is doing and figure it out. And so I had a really tough time with that ending and a number of endings. And so here's the deal. I look back on it now, and I know now that God is the author of my story. He is the editor of my story. He is the choreographer of my story, and he is the publisher of my story. It's not my story only. It's God's story. And I need to submit my life to God every day, that God, this is not my story. This is you are the author of my story. And you have the capacity to consistently bring good out of intentional wrong or unintentional wrong. You can eventually make good out of that, and you do that. And that's what God has done consistently with my story. Every part of my story has been validated by a life lesson. God is the author of it all, and he's putting my whole life story together. And there is a wonderful release and relief with that I am living in now.
So you go through this process, you begin to find freedom, to find healing, to find the things that matter and pursue those. Was it awkward at first to find that freedom? How do you have a difficult conversation when you've never had a difficult conversation? Was it freeing? Was it scary? Was it a little of both? Was it, joyful? How did that begin to feel when you began to experience the freedom that Christ gives you?
So we moved to Winnipeg, and I started taking counseling courses in seminary, one course per semester for the next 7 years. And it was all the above, what you just described. I was so enjoying learning this new reality that Deanna had been trying to wake me up to. And she was learning too. And it was transforming our marriage and our family, and the church that we were attending was a part of that. But it was also scary because as a missionary, we have supporters. I'm growing significantly. I'm changing. I'm not changing my doctrine or who I am, but I am growing by leaps and bounds. Will my supporters be okay with that? Because I have always been nice. What if I shared a story where I wasn't nice? Will I still be accepted? Am I going to lose some friends? Oh,
I can't believe you'd have a non-nice story, Dan. I just find that hard to believe. So,
in my family, in my siblings, I'm the oldest of 7. My parents, 3 years after I moved to Winnipeg, my parents divorced in their 39th year of marriage. And for the next number of years, between my siblings and nieces and nephews, for the next probably 15 years, we averaged 2 divorces per year. And so that's the natural outcome of those rules. You've been trained to not talk and not trust and not feel and not think and not choose and change. You have major detachment issues. And so marriage doesn't work. And today, 31 years later, the divorce rate in my family is 75%. And 50 years ago, we were the most perfect looking family in church, sitting there in birth order, always taking notes, never falling asleep. and we were perfect looking. But today it's just a lot of chaos and a lot of brokenness. And so it's like, I think that what God is wanting to do through this book and through my journey, he's wanting to help my siblings and nieces and nephews to know that there is hope and there is help and they can change, because I have been walking that journey.
So through this process, you've seen transformation in your life. You've had healing. You've had growth. You've stretched, probably in ways that were very uncomfortable, but have taken you to new areas of ministry. Even, I would suspect that, because when you become free, you become fearless in a sense, not afraid to dive into something that would cause you to shrink back prior. How did Dan Reinhardt come into your life? When you what was the catalyst of that relationship?
Our family, we homeschooled our boys all the way through. Deanne and I became the leaders in Winnipeg for the homeschool situation. And we went to a conference of HSLDA, Homeschool League of Defense Association, in Dallas. And Dan Reinhardt was a board member of HSLDA Canada. That's where we met about 25 years ago. And so we hit it off right away because we have a few things in common. And over the years, we have just kept track of each other. And we have just, seems like the Lord has just sort of blessed us, our friendship. And about a year ago right now, it seemed that the Lord was binding us together for the purpose of a series of messages, which became the book. And so the Lord has been engineering our friendship little by little for the last 2.5 decades.
This has been a special edition of Soul to Soul with Pure Radio host Mike Bact. Welcome to this special edition of Soul to Soul with Pure Radio host Mike Bact. For over 25 years, Soul to Soul has shared intimate conversations with Christian musicians, authors, and ministries, people making an impact for the gospel. With this special edition of Soul to Soul, here is Mike Bact.
Let me turn to Dan Reinhardt. He's been patiently waiting here on the side.
Okay, it's a fascinating story to hear Dan again.
It is, and I imagine even when you've heard this story several times, it still brings joy to you to hear that redemptive story work out in just remove Dan Woodard from the picture, but any human, when you see someone go from prison to freedom, from bondage to life, it's reaffirming. It gives us strength.
It sure is. It's the making of a really good movie.
Well, that's to be seen, perhaps. Who knows? These are stories that I think connect. But so you and Dan relationship developed over a lengthy period of time, and frankly, I think that's beautiful, because now when it's time and it's the Lord's timing to begin to work on these series of messages, you had a history that you could draw from. How did that Did Dan come to you with the idea? Did you go to him and say, you know what, I see this as a series? How did the idea for the messages that became the book find its beginning?
Well, this is an interesting story, and it's clearly God orchestrating some things. Dan and I knew of each other those years, but I wouldn't say we were like best pals. We would talk maybe once a year or happen to see each other once in a while, but he's a nice guy. I like him. And it was about probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years now. I was driving on an Alberta road near where Dan and Deanna lived, and I had this thought: just stop in and say hi. So I'm learning to listen to the promptings of the Lord and not ignore them. And so I said, okay. So I phoned him up and said, hey, I'm driving by. Can I just drop in? Well, sure. Opened the door and I came in. We had this wonderful talk and left. And I had no idea what would come out of that. But then it was a little bit later that I got a call from a mission director. And he said, I'd like you, Dan Reinhardt, to come and do a series of teaching for some of our workers in our mission. And I looked at my calendar and it was a direct conflict. And I said, I would love to come, but I can't. But I have a friend who I think would help you. In fact, he is a specialist with Native ministries, and a lot of your work deals with Native ministry. He said, sure, what's his name? So I told him, Dan Woodard. So Dan came, did a workshop, and hit a home run as he told his story. And I don't know what else you did there, Dan, but you did something that really connected with those folk. Well, that mission director happened to be a member of a local church in Three Hills, where I live. And that church was having some tough times, and they had a sudden pastoral change, and the church board said, we need someone to come and help us work through this. And Dan Woodard has been giving workshops for decades. And this son said, I think I have a guy that could help us. So they invited Dan Woodard to come to the church board. He gave his story there, just like you've heard of it. They said, wow, the whole church needs to hear this. So next Sunday, he gave it to the whole church. And then they said, wow, we need a series of messages to follow up. And then that's where Dan said, just a minute. So Dan, you better pick it up from there, because you know the rest of that part.
Oh, I was so resistant to this, because I know that the reputation of this church that was asking me to do things is long time, almost 100 years of history of being a rules-based church. And I know firsthand what can happen when you try to offer a different model other than living by the rules. You're going to lose friends. It's not an easy path. And when I was asked to do this series, I said, I don't think so. I said, I don't enjoy being burned at the stake after the service. and they said, no, we are serious. I said, I don't know. And so I finally said, the only way I'd be willing to do this is if Dan Reinhardt would team up with me. And he, what'd you say, Dan?
Well, I said, I sure wouldn't do it unless Dan Woodard is there, because I'm not tackling this one by myself. And so the agreement was, well, okay, we'll do it together. And then the interesting timing, COVID hit right around then, which means you can't actually go to the church. You got to do this all by recording. So Dan and I said, well, we'll do it together. And what we ended up doing was creating a message on screen, like with Zoom, and recording it, editing it a little bit. And then they played that in their service for the people who couldn't be there. And we did a series of 8 messages.
And so at some point, someone said, because someone always says, this would make a great book, right?
That's right.
And sometimes it's just that simple, that somebody suggests that, and it seems like the natural outgrowth of the work that you've already done. Was it that easy, or was there some complexities that most people don't see?
Well, I think it was that easy, because I'm a writer. I have written a lot and never been published. I've probably written 300 discussion guides over the past 40 years. And I have been saying since I was age 17, what just happened is chapter 1. What just happened is chapter 37. So I've been writing the story of my life in the back of my head for a long time. So this book just happened very easily. This book is actually going to be the introduction, because I'm writing a trilogy. This book is on the rules. That's the introduction. The next book I'm writing now, it'll be entitled Regardless. It'll be a more comprehensive application of the rules book to a wider variety of chaos in family life. And then the next book is going to be entitled Redemption, how to redeem everything where you're at, and how to change, how to create a different legacy than the legacy that you have been created up to now. So this is going to be it's sort of a thing that it's a God thing that God has put together. I didn't see the rules thing coming, but the Lord sure did.
It's fascinating to me how instructive hindsight is, because when you look back at your story, or as one such as I who looks at your story, and I can see the hand of God at work just in hearing your story. And I can almost sense a little bit of that path that he was leading you down. Again, I'm cheating a little bit. I know your story and the book and all those things, but it's amazing how intimate he is in all of the details in our lives, even the ones that we would consider bad moments, ugly moments, rebellious moments, the throwaway moments. And he was right there with you, redeeming those or storing them up for later redemption at a future time. And to me, that is so encouraging, because it communicates to me, and hopefully to those that are hearing today, that there's nothing that God wastes in your story. Is that true with you?
Oh, is it ever? I mean, that's what the book is about. The Lord has the ability to take the weirdest thing and sometimes the most painful thing, and sometimes evil things that are going on, but sometimes things that are very confusing, and he shows up. He shows that he's right there. He will prove to me how much he is involved, how much he loves me through it all, how much he wants to use this tragedy or this blunder or this confusing thing, this chaotic thing. God has the ability to use even that for good. And I'm seeing that every day. That's a daily lifestyle now. God is using my story and the book to help give hope to people that Jesus can make a difference. And Jesus is what people have been waiting for, because no one can love like he loves.
I think there's a hidden blessing in this, and it's probably one of those expand your vision moments. I think that all believers have this myopia or this tunnel vision of the gifts the Lord has given us, whatever they are, and we always think they're smaller than they really are. In God's understanding of what he has done in you, you probably at first think, well, Lord, thank you for setting me free. And then it dawns on you at some point in your journey, maybe somebody else, another individual, might, through my story, find the same freedom. But it doesn't stop there, does it? I mean, this isn't just for people. This legalism infects lots of areas, not just individuals, but churches, organizations, religious organizations, even businesses can be very legalistic in their structure. Are you seeing this multiplication of impact, a broadening of the vision from when you first began?
I am, and it's coming. It's broader than I ever would have imagined. It's not just at the church level, but people who have been saved and discipled in a legalistic system have contacted us and with tears say, I grew up with those rules, those same rules. I grew up in this church, and then I got saved, and I was discipled, and then we joined a mission agency, and lo and behold, the mission agency still had those same rules. And the longer we were in it, it wasn't going to work. And so we resigned. But here we are, and we don't know how to break those rules. And if we don't break those rules, we're going to be divorced in the next 6 months. Or maybe I'm going to murder my spouse. we're not getting along. We are having physical altercations between us. And can you help us break the rules? And through weekly coaching, there is life transformation going on, and you see it on Facebook. The Lord changing the DNA of that marriage and that man's ministry. And you see people coming alive. And it really does boil down to the life that Jesus offers is very different than a rules-based kind of system. Jesus offers freedom, and he is working in people's lives and giving hope in the midst of this divorce or this fractured, broken sibling relationships. There's all kinds of stories that are coming to us of people asking for help who grew up in a legalistic system. And my own neighbor, a prodigal son, heard my series, and at the end of the series called me and said, "Dan, I need to talk." So this is my hunting partner for 15 years. And he says, "Dan, I'm the prodigal." And I realize that Jesus is totally different than the Jesus I was raised with. And I need to come back to Jesus. Tell me how to do that. And I've probably seen about 15 prodigals come back to the Lord through the series and through the book already. And two of them are Buddhists who raised in a Christian home, abandoned by their dads, and left the faith, and now they're coming back to Jesus and forsaking Buddha because they realize Jesus is what they really long for. And so God is taking this story and helping people to return to him. It's just amazing.
That is such an uplifting thing you just shared about those that have found freedom. There is a hidden trap for the rules-based person, the legalistic person, however you want to ascribe a title to that, in that when they've come from that world, they think there must be rules that are different than the rules they're keeping. And so they're going to substitute a new set of rules for an old set of rules. It's not like that at all, though, is it? Say you're talking to a person that is beginning this journey. They've had that epiphany, that moment of awareness that I need to change. So how does that start? I know you can't go through it all, and you don't want to give a simple 5-step plan. It's not maybe that simple, but how does the process begin to unwire those wires?
Boy, that's a great question. Dan Reinhardt, I'd like you to weigh in on this, but for me, it comes through breaking each rule, starting with the don't talk rule. And my dear wife has been the primary agent of change in my life. And she understands a whole lot about relationship that I have not. She understands issues of power and control way quicker than I do. She is able to see what's coming ahead, and she's never been inaccurate. God has given her discernment. And so Deanna has helped me to come alive, and it has bonded us to learn from my wife. I was raised exactly the opposite, that mom could never teach dad anything. But there's a verse, who can find a virtuous woman? And I never knew until a couple years ago that the word for virtuous means warrior. And my wife is a warrior woman. And what makes her a warrior is Ephesians 6. She is passionate about protecting the kids, protecting me, and she is passionate about getting into my heart and knowing my heart. And I am so grateful for Deanna being wired by God to be a part of me unraveling the legalism and unraveling the those rules. And Dan, how could you add to that?
Okay, yeah, I've been actually sitting here thinking, I've got to tell him. I got to tell him this. Just in your own story, Dan, I see 3 phases. First of all, there's pain and a reality check. That puts you into phase 2, which is learning. We often won't learn unless we come to the point of pain that's not working. I have to learn. And that learning was not just reading a book. You were in a class, you were with people, you were talking to your teacher. There was a dialogue going on. Then it went into phase 3, which is practice. And you began to do it. And as you practiced, you began to find freedom. And I want to suggest to your listeners that that is the way people change. God allows us to get to the point, to the end of ourself with a pain, and the reality is it's not working. And we begin to realize, I have got to change. And that puts us on a learning journey, but it has to be more than just being handed a book. You actually have to start talking to somebody. So you have to break the first rule, which is you begin to talk the truth about what your life is, and start talking about the secret things that are just binding you up. If you don't break that first rule, nothing else will change. But you have to find a safe person to do that with. So not just anybody. You got to find a safe, trustworthy, godly person who will keep it confidential, but you got to talk. And then you got to start actually changing, and that's practicing. So, Mike, when we did this in the church here, we said to them, a series of messages won't change your church. You have got to have small groups that are going to get together and talk about things. So along with the messages, we set up a system of small groups that we train the leaders. How do you have a transformational small group? And it's different than a home Bible study, by the way. It's different. And there's a special set of ways of doing it that actually allow that to happen. And we said to the board, you have to be the ones that are leading those groups. And so they did. And they had over half their church in the small groups. Dialogue started happening, and they said, folks, we are so excited. It's actually changing the church. So that's pretty exciting stuff.
That is the kind of testimony that you'd love to put on the back of a book or anywhere, just to broadcast, to let people know that it's not just theory. This isn't you set out to write a book of new rules. You're breaking the old ones, but you're also talking from the experience of this is a proven way to practice and to live. I'm trying to find the right word, and it is escaping me, but it's so easy for us because we are so systems oriented. No matter how we live, there are just ways and patterns and habits that we fall into, and those habits, when hardened, become those rules. The idea behind this is not it's another system that you work out. It's a process, if you will. Is that maybe a better way to say it?
For sure. Yeah, you do not simply want to substitute another set of rules. Not at all. And that's where the practice piece comes in, where you learn ways, a different way of living and of conversing, but you have to practice it. You got to actually do it with people. And you'll stumble along, and you won't do it perfectly all the time. But as you practice, God will take you further and further into the freedom that you can see life transformation showing up right in front of you.
So how are people responding? How are they responding to the book, to these courses? I mean, you've given a little bit of a glimpse of that with the church that you did this through. But is the pattern holding the more widespread the book gets and people hear about this? Are you getting feedback from freed people?
Well, we both are. And since Christmas, my wife and I have been receiving feedback from about 5 or 6 people per day, 7 days a week. It's nonstop. These are new people coming and sharing with us what they're learning from the book. They are calling us, emailing, texting. We are having an average of 3 to 5 conversations with people every day, 7 days a week. And the common feedback is we didn't know, and we are now talking. We never talked before. I got a text just yesterday from a friend in Alabama, and she said, "We, in all caps, we are now talking." And she's been married for 40 years, and these are people who are people in ministry, or they're people in church, and there's people who don't know the Lord who are talking about the Lord now, and talking about what God is showing them, and the whole thing of emotions is a new idea for certain people, and that it's okay to feel. And so I would say there's a general awakening happening, and there's a lot of pain out there that people can find. They need to find the Lord in their pain, and we're helping them to break these rules as a part of the pathway to finding the Lord.
It's been my experience that when the Lord has done what he's done and accomplished, and there's always a sense of satisfaction when a thing like a book is released, and it's now released into the world. People are beginning to read it and put these rule breakings, the breaking the rules into practice. It's still hard for me to say it that way. I keep wanting to come up with new rules. It's the way my brain's wired. I think we all are to a degree. I like the idea of rule breaking. It's freeing. I've come to believe that God doesn't just let you sit on your laurels. Do you have an inkling of where this might go in the next 6 months to a year? I'm not trying to be grandiose or spin it into a whole new series, because sometimes we chase those things that God doesn't intend either. But are you sensing the Lord whispering to you about this next season and what that may entail, what it may look like?
Yes, Dan and I have some steps forward. Dan, why don't you share that?
Yeah, well, the Lord uses current circumstances to his good. So while COVID restrictions have been so debilitating for many ministries, it also has opened up another whole door where people are having to go online. And I'm saying to Dan, you've got a life message here that's starting in this book, and you've got 2 more books coming. And this life message needs to get out. And the internet is the way it can get out to way more people than he could personally go, from church to church or group to group. He's got to figure out, and I'm partnering to help him figure this path out, that this story can actually get broadcast further, which is where technology, the modern technology, kicks in, and there could be people all over the globe being helped with this. But it's got to be a different way than just Dan going and doing his workshops like he's always done. So that's what we think is where the future seems to be opening up.
We have a plan to, by this June, to have a sort of like a DVD set, or people will be able to download the whole series, 20-minute conversations, 9 of them, 1 per chapter, with a leader's discussion guide for small groups. And we want to make this accessible to anybody who wants to use this in their church setting. And so, step by step, we are making plans to meet some deadlines, and we'll see what the Lord has.
It's a beautiful thing when people find freedom. Jesus reserved some of his harshest words for those that kept the rules, but on the inside were, as he said, whitewashed tombs. That everything they did was a facade. It was lacking substance. And maybe this is the way that we kind of bring this to a close, our conversation today. Taking it back to you, Dan Woodard, what are you like on the inside today, as opposed to the way you were growing up? I mean, can you describe what that freedom feels like for someone who's somewhere along this road in this process and where you are now, to give them that sense of what they can hope to achieve and will get at the end of their journey?
I think the difference in my life in the past 31 years compared to the previous 34, the first 34 years, I was a struggler, but unaware of it and unaware of a lot of things. And so today I remain a struggler, but I am able to face my struggles, and I'm able to be real about them, and I'm able to connect with people compared to being a Lone Ranger type before. And I think it does boil down to authenticity and transparency, and when we share what Jesus is doing in our lives with people and share the struggles or the victories, people can identify. And so I feel like today, like God is the author of my story. So it's not my story. And so whatever God wants, I want. And I feel so blessed and so encouraged by people's lives that are changing, and people getting hope, people identifying with us. It just feels like the Lord is using what he's done, including the mess, and he's using it to help other people have hope and have a sense of their own healing and freedom that God wants for them.
Let me ask one final question then. Probably the most practical question of our conversation is, how can people find the book? Where do they find it at? How can they purchase one? How do they connect with you or find more materials as they become available, on whether it's the DVD set or the things in June or other books down the road? How did they make that connection so that they don't miss the opportunities for growth here?
We have a website, letsbreaktherules.ca. CA stands for Canada. And that website will be all the information on how to get the book. They can order the book, visit the shop page, and we will be updating the site as other resources become available. And so letsbreaktherules.ca is where they need to go.
This has been a special edition of Soul to Soul with Pure Radio host Mike Bact.